He stood on the deck of a billion-dollar yacht, the city lights of Miami painting streaks across the dark water. The woman in his arms, a colleague with eyes full of ambition and lips that tasted of champagne and rebellion, was the key to his future. He was Ethan Sterling, a man on the verge of conquering Wall Street. As he leaned in and kissed her, he felt a surge of victory. He had it all, a killer career and a beautiful, quiet wife at home, pregnant with his first child. But he was wrong. He didn't have it all. He had nothing. Because at that exact moment, his pregnant wife was watching, and she didn't just own the yacht, she owned the entire company he was fighting to climb. The scent of success in Manhattan was a unique blend of hot asphalt, expensive perfume, and the faint, metallic hum of money being made. For Ethan Sterling, it was the air he breathed, the fuel that propelled him through 80-hour work weeks. From his corner office on the 54th floor of the Sterling and Vanguard Capitol building, he could see the city spread out like a circuit board, pulsing with an energy that matched his own. At 34, he was a senior vice president, a shark in a sea of sharks, and he was just one big deal away from the coveted title of partner. That deal was codenamed Project Nautilus, a multi-billion-dollar acquisition of a green energy startup that would redefine the firm's portfolio. It was his baby. He'd spent the last 6 months living and breathing it, sacrificing sleep, meals, and weekends. His reflection in the floor-to-ceiling window showed a man tailored for this world. A sharp Tom Ford suit, a Patek Philippe watch, and a jawline that could cut glass. But the reflection also showed the dark circles under his eyes, the subtle tension in his shoulders. He ran a hand through his perfectly coiffed dark hair and loosened his silk tie. The pressure was immense, culminating in the annual Sterling and Vanguard Summer Gala, an exclusive yacht party for the firm's top brass and most important clients. It was less a party and more a battlefield where careers were made or broken. A handshake with the right board member, a clever word with a client, could seal his promotion. This year, it was everything. He finally left the office at 10 p.m., the silence of the empty floor a stark contrast to the buzzing in his head. The elevator descended smoothly, carrying him from the stratosphere of high finance back to the streets of New York, where his driver was waiting. The ride to their Upper East Side penthouse was a blur of traffic and neon. As he stepped into the apartment, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. The sharp, modern lines of his office were replaced by soft, warm elegance. The air smelled of lavender and old books, not glass and steel. This was Usher's world. Usher Sterling, his wife of 4 years, was the embodiment of quiet grace. He found her in the living room, curled on a plush white sofa, with a book in her lap, a gentle swell visible beneath her cashmere lounge dress. Her blonde hair was a soft halo under the warm lamplight, and she looked up at him with a smile that could melt glaciers. "You're late," she said, her voice soft and without accusation. "Nautilus is a beast," he replied, dropping his briefcase and shrugging off his jacket. He leaned down to kiss her, his lips brushing against her temple. He felt a pang of guilt. She was 6 months pregnant with their son, and he'd been little more than a ghost in their home for months. "How are you feeling? How's our little guy?" he asked, placing a hand on her stomach. "He's a dancer tonight," she smiled, placing her hand over his. "And I'm fine. Just tired." Usher was different from the women he worked with. She was from old money, the kind that didn't feel the need to flaunt itself. Her family, the Davenports, were philanthropists and patrons of the arts. He knew they were wealthy, of course. This penthouse, their Hamptons estate, her casual disinterest in price tags, it was all evidence of that. but he viewed it as a soft, inherited comfort, a world away from the cutthroat meritocracy where he was forging his own legacy. He loved her for her serenity, her gentle nature. It was a balm to his sharp-edged ambition. But sometimes, in his darkest moments, he felt a flicker of resentment. Her life was so easy. She had never known the gnawing hunger for success that drove him, the fear of failure that kept him awake at night. "Don't forget, the gala is tomorrow night," he said, moving to the wet bar to pour himself a scotch. "It's important you're there, Leah. Mason Thorne will be there, the whole board." Asha's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course, I have my dress all ready. I just hope I can handle being on my feet for that long." "You'll be fine," he said, a little too dismissively. "Just smile and look beautiful. That's all you need to do." He immediately regretted the words. They sounded condescending, dismissive of her. He saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Not hurt, but something analytical. It vanished as quickly as it appeared. "I'll do my best," she said, her voice even. Later that night, as he lay in bed, he watched her sleep. Her face was peaceful, angelic. He loved her. He truly did. She was his anchor, his sanctuary from the storm of his life. But the storm was where he felt most alive. He thought of the yacht, of the powerful men he needed to impress, of the partnership that was so close he could taste it. He thought of Isabella Rossi, the brilliant and beautiful new analyst on his team, whose sharp mind and even sharper glances made his pulse quicken. He was a man standing on a precipice, with a safe, beautiful home behind him, and a thrilling, dangerous world before him. And he was beginning to realize, with a terrifying clarity, that he wanted to jump. He convinced himself it wasn't about another woman. It was about solidifying his own power, proving he wasn't just Asha Davenport's husband. He was Ethan Sterling, and he had earned his place at the top. It was a dangerous thought, a justification that would curdle into the poison that would ultimately destroy him. He fell asleep dreaming of the ocean, not of calm waters, but of a tempest. The next morning, the office was electric with pre-gala anticipation. But for Ethan's team, the focus remained squarely on Project Nautilus. The final presentation for the board was due Monday, and the data models were still being stress-tested. The nerve center of this operation was a glass-walled conference room Ethan had commandeered, its walls covered in whiteboards, filled with complex equations and market projections. And at the heart of it, sitting across from him, was Isabella Bella Rossi. Bella was a recent Wharton graduate, but she carried herself with the confidence of a seasoned veteran. She was a whirlwind of fierce intelligence and unapologetic ambition, wrapped in a package that was impossible to ignore. Today, she wore a blood-red sheath dress that contrasted sharply with her jet-black hair, which she wore in a severe, stylish bob. Her dark eyes missed nothing. "The risk-leverage ratio on the secondary assets is still too high," she said, her voice cutting through the low hum of the servers. "If the European markets dip even half a point post-acquisition, our 5-year projection collapses." She wasn't just smart, she was clairvoyant. She saw angles Ethan missed, challenged his assumptions, and pushed him to be better. He respected her for it. But there was more. There was a current that flowed between them, an unspoken energy that was equal parts professional rivalry and raw physical chemistry. "Run the numbers again with a built-in currency hedge," Ethan instructed, leaning over the table. He was close enough to smell her perfume, something dark and complex, like jasmine and leather. "Model A 1.5% dip. I want to see the breaking point." "Already did," she said without looking up from her laptop, a faint smirk playing on her lips. The numbers are on your tablet. Sent them 10 minutes ago. He glanced down. She was right. He felt a jolt, a mix of irritation at being outpaced and a grudging admiration. She made him feel sharp, but also slightly off balance. Throughout the day, their dance continued. They debated strategy, tore apart spreadsheets, and rebuilt financial models, their minds working in a synergy that was both exhilarating and dangerous. The rest of the junior analysts in the room faded into the background, becoming mere spectators to the Ethan and Bella show. Around 4 p.m., he called a short break. People shuffled out, grateful for the reprieve. Only Bella remained, leaning back in her chair and stretching like a sleek panther. "You're nervous about tonight, aren't you?" she asked, her tone casual, but her eyes piercing. "Confident," Ethan corrected. "A lot is riding on this." "It's not just about Nautilus, is it?" She walked around the table, her heels clicking softly on the polished concrete floor. She stopped behind his chair, her presence a warm weight in the air. "It's about the partnership. I hear James Miller is your main competition." "Miller is a plodder. He gets by on seniority, not vision." "Vision needs a champion," she said softly, her voice close to his ear. "Mason Thorne is old school. He values loyalty. Have you ever thought that maybe your marriage softens your image? Makes you look comfortable?" The word hung in the air, a subtle but potent poison. Comfortable. It was the one thing he feared being seen as. The man who married into money and lost his edge. It was the exact insecurity she had managed to pinpoint and press down on with surgical precision. "My marriage has nothing to do with my work," he said, his voice tighter than he intended. "Doesn't it?" she mused. "Asha is lovely. So, gentle. From a world where deals are made at charity galas, not in boardrooms at 3 a.m. The men on the board, they see you and they see her. They see a man who has already won the lottery. Why would a man like that still be hungry?" It was a masterclass in manipulation. She was articulating his deepest fears as if they were objective truths. She was creating a problem that only she could help him solve. "And what do you suggest?" he asked, turning to look up at her. Her expression was a mixture of sympathy and conspiracy. "Tonight, you need to be seen as a killer, not as a husband. You need to show them that you're willing to risk everything for the firm, that your only loyalty is to winning." She placed a hand on his shoulder, her fingers cool against the fabric of his suit. The touch was brief, professional, yet it sent a jolt through him. "I can help you with that," she whispered. "I know what these men want to see. I know how to play the game." Just then, his phone buzzed. It was a text from Asha. "Feeling a bit tired, honey. Maybe I should sit tonight out. Don't want to overdo it." A wave of conflicting emotions washed over him. Concern for his pregnant wife warred with a sudden, selfish sense of relief. Her absence would simplify things. It would free him. He typed back a quick, carefully worded reply. "Of course, honey. Rest up. Your health is what's most important. I'll handle things tonight." He put the phone down, his screen facing up. Bella's eyes flickered to the name on the screen. Asha. Her smirk was back, wider this time. "It seems the universe agrees with me," she said, her voice a low purr. She walked towards the door, then paused, turning back to him. "Wear the blue tie tonight. It brings out the ruthlessness in your eyes." She left, and Ethan was alone in the silent conference room. The whiteboards, filled with the logic and reason of Project Nautilus, seemed to mock him. He was being played, and he knew it. Bella Rossi was a serpent, coiling herself around his ambition, whispering temptations. But in his heart, a reckless voice told him she was right. To get what he wanted, he couldn't afford to be the gentle, comfortable husband. Tonight, he had to be the killer, and he was beginning to believe that he needed her to help him pull the trigger. The Vanguard, Sterling and Vanguard's corporate yacht, was less a boat and more a floating palace. A 300-foot marvel of engineering and opulence, it was docked at the most exclusive marina in Miami, its gleaming white hull a beacon of corporate power. As Ethan stepped aboard, he was immediately immersed in a world of curated success. A jazz trio played softly on the aft deck. Waiters in crisp white uniforms circulated with trays of vintage Dom Perignon and Caspian caviar, and the air buzzed with the low murmur of powerful people making powerful conversation. Ethan, dressed in a bespoke navy suit and the blue tie Bella had recommended, felt a surge of adrenaline. This was his arena. He moved through the crowd with practiced ease, shaking hands, sharing a laugh with a hedge fund manager, and offering a sharp insight on the Asian market to a board member. He was performing, and he was flawless. For an hour, he was the model executive, charming, intelligent, and relentlessly focused. He had a brief, strategic conversation with Mason Thorne, the firm's imposing CEO. Thorne, a man in his late 60s with a mane of silver hair and eyes that had seen decades of market booms and busts, gave him a curt, approving nod. "Nautilus is looking strong, Sterling. Don't drop the ball." It was the closest thing to a compliment Thorne ever gave. As the yacht pulled away from the dock and headed towards the open water, the sun began to set, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and purple. The city skyline became a glittering tapestry against the darkening horizon. The atmosphere on board shifted, loosening as the champagne flowed more freely. Ethan scanned the crowd for Bella. He found her near the bow, locked in an animated conversation with two of the firm's most influential and notoriously difficult clients. She was laughing, her head tilted back, a champagne flute held delicately in her hand. She wore a backless, emerald-green silk dress that clung to her like a second skin. She was, in a word, breathtaking, and she was working the room with a skill that rivaled his own. When she caught his eye, she gave him a slow, deliberate wink before turning her attention back to the clients. Later, he saw her again, this time talking to James Miller, his rival for the partnership. Miller was laughing, clearly captivated. Ethan felt a sharp, unexpected pang of jealousy. Was she playing them both? Of course she was. And that, perversely, only made her more alluring. He was on his third glass of champagne when she finally found him. He was standing alone on the upper deck, looking out at the endless expanse of the Atlantic. The music and chatter from the main deck below were a muted thrum. "Hiding from the sharks?" she asked, her voice a sultry murmur beside him. "Observing their feeding patterns," he replied, not turning. "You've done well tonight," she said, coming to stand next to him at the railing. "Thorne was impressed. I heard him talking to the board." "Good," he said, the single word feeling inadequate. "But you still look worried," she pressed. "You're still thinking about Miller. You're still thinking about what I said, about looking comfortable." She let the word hang between them again. The sea breeze whipped a strand of her dark hair across her face, and she tucked it behind her ear. The movement was simple, yet devastatingly elegant. "Asha didn't come," he stated, more to himself than to her. "I know," Bella said softly. "It's for the best. Her world is different." She wouldn't understand this. The hunger, the need to win. She placed her hand on his forearm. Her touch was electric, a stark contrast to the gentle, familiar comfort of Asha's hand. "But I do, Ethan. I understand it perfectly." I see it in you." He finally turned to face her. The last vestiges of sunlight were gone, and they were bathed in the soft, silver glow of the moon. Her eyes were dark pools, reflecting the starlight. In that moment, she was everything his life wasn't: dangerous, unpredictable, and thrillingly new. She represented the version of himself he was desperate to become, the unbound, ruthless winner. "You're playing a dangerous game, Bella," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "It's the only game worth playing," she whispered back. "And we're on the same team." She leaned in closer. The scent of her perfume, the warmth of her body, the challenge in her eyes. It was an intoxicating cocktail that drowned out the last of his reason. The guilt he should have felt for Usher, for his unborn son, was a distant echo, a signal from a shore he had already left behind. All that existed was the humid night air, the rocking of the yacht, and the woman in front of him. She was the final piece of his ascent, the symbolic rejection of the comfortable life he so feared. "Prove it," he heard himself say. "Prove you're on my team." A slow, triumphant smile spread across her face. She raised herself onto her toes, her emerald dress shimmering in the moonlight. Her lips were inches from his. "The partnership is yours, Ethan," she murmured, and then she closed the distance. The kiss was everything he had imagined, and more. It was fire and champagne, a collision of ambition and desire. His hands went to her waist, pulling her flush against him. It was a kiss of conquest, a confirmation of the choice he had made. He was no longer just Usher's husband. He was Ethan Sterling, a man who took what he wanted. In that moment of reckless triumph, he felt like the king of the world, alone with his prize on the top deck of a floating kingdom. He was utterly, completely, and catastrophically wrong. He wasn't alone. He wasn't king. He was just a fool in a passion play, and the curtain was about to be torn away. The kiss was deep and consuming, a physical manifestation of the secret, thrilling energy that had been building between them for months. Ethan's world narrowed to the taste of Bella's lipstick and the feel of her body pressed against his. The muffled sounds of the party below, the vastness of the ocean around them, it all faded into a distant hum. This felt like victory. It felt like power. And then a sudden, sharp burst of feedback from a microphone cut through the night, making them both jump apart. "If I could have everyone's attention, please. Ladies and gentlemen, your attention." The voice, amplified and unmistakable, was Mason Thorne's. It boomed across the yacht, shattering their private moment. Ethan and Bella, startled and slightly disheveled, moved instinctively towards the railing of the upper deck, peering down at the main deck below. The crowd had gathered near the grand staircase. Mason Thorne stood at a lectern, a spotlight making his silver hair shine. He held a champagne flute in his hand. "For over 50 years, Thorne began, his voice resonating with authority, "Sterling and Vanguard has been a leader, a titan of industry. We've weathered recessions, navigated market crashes, and have always come out stronger. We've done this through grit, through innovation, and through a quiet, steady leadership that has guided this firm from the shadows." Ethan exchanged a confused look with Bella. What was this about? Thorne usually gave a boilerplate speech about quarterly earnings, and then let the party continue. This felt different, more formal, more significant. "Mason Sterling and my mentor, Jonathan Davenport," Thorne continued. "While the Sterling name remains on our door, the Davenport family has always preferred to remain a silent, guiding partner. Their majority stake in this company has been managed by a trust, their identity a closely guarded secret, allowing the firm's work to speak for itself." Down below, a murmur went through the crowd. Ethan felt a strange prickle of unease. Davenport. Asher's surname. It had to be a coincidence. Her family were patrons of the arts, not corporate titans. He'd met her father once before he passed, a gentle, bookish man who collected rare manuscripts. This couldn't be connected. Bella seemed to sense his distraction. "Don't worry about this," she whispered, her hand finding his again. "It's just corporate history. Our moment is up here." But Ethan couldn't look away. He was transfixed by Thorne's words. The Davenport Trust has always believed that leadership should be earned, not inherited, Thorne announced, his voice rising with theatrical flair. They have allowed merit to be the sole driver of our success. But tonight marks Project Nautilus on the horizon, and a new generation coming. The principal beneficiary of the trust has decided it is time to take a more public-facing role. It is my profound honor to introduce to you the person who has been our silent leader of Sterling and Vanguard Capital. A palpable shockwave rippled through the assembled guests. The owner, here, tonight. The secret power behind the throne was about to be revealed. Ethan's heart hammered in his chest. His mind raced. Who could it be? A reclusive European billionaire? A sovereign wealth fund? Thorne paused for dramatic effect, sweeping his gaze across the stunned faces. "Please welcome the chairwoman of the Davenport Trust, and the new chairwoman of the board of Sterling and Vanguard." Ethan held his breath. Bella squeezed his hand, her own excitement forgotten in the face of this monumental revelation. "Mrs. Asher Davenport Sterling." The name hit Ethan with the force of a physical blow. It didn't compute. The sounds arranged themselves in his ears, but his brain refused to assemble them into a coherent thought. Asher, Davenport, Sterling. His Asher? No, it was impossible. It was a joke, a mistake. Then a second spotlight flared to life, illuminating a secluded, curtained-off VIP lounge on the main deck that Ethan hadn't even noticed. And there she was. His wife, Asher, was not at home, sick in bed. She was sitting in a large, throne-like armchair, as calm and serene as if she were in their living room. She wasn't wearing one of her usual soft, flowing dresses. She was dressed in a stunning, custom-made navy blue gown that was both elegant and authoritative. Her gentle pregnancy swell was not a sign of fragility, but of power. Diamonds glittered at her throat and ears. Her soft, gentle face, the one he kissed goodbye that morning, was composed, regal, and utterly unreadable. She met his gaze across the distance, her blue eyes locking onto his from 100 feet away. There was no anger in them, no hurt, just a calm, piercing finality. It was the look of a queen observing a court jester who had just performed his final, foolish act. The world tilted on its axis. The blood drained from Ethan's face, a cold dread creeping into its place. He felt Bella's hand snatch away from his, as if it had been burned. He dared a glance at her. Her face was a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. Her mouth was slightly agape, her perfectly applied lipstick suddenly looking garish. The ambition in her eyes had been replaced by sheer, primal panic. She wasn't looking at Asher. She was looking at him, at the man who had just kissed the boss's mistress in full view of the boss's yacht. No, not the boss's mistress. He had just kissed an insignificant junior analyst after betraying the owner of the entire company, the woman who was pregnant with his child. Down below, polite, stunned applause began to build as Asher rose gracefully from her chair. She gave a small, regal nod to the crowd. Mason Thorne beamed beside her. Ethan Sterling stood frozen on the upper deck, the moonlight that had seemed so romantic moments ago now feeling like a harsh, interrogating spotlight. The kiss, which had felt like a coronation, was now revealed for what it was. A self-inflicted execution. He had not climbed the ladder. He had kicked it out from under himself and was now in a free fall, with the woman he had so casually underestimated watching from a height he could never hope to reach. The universe, which moments before had consisted of the space between his lips and Bella's, had expanded into a cold, infinite void with Asher at its center. Down below, the party had transformed. The stunned applause gave way to a frenzied buzz of networking as every executive, client, and board member on the yacht scrambled to get a moment with their newly revealed queen. A formidable security detail, men in sharp suits with earpieces Ethan had barely registered before, materialized around Asher, forming an impenetrable barrier. Mason Thorne stood at her side like a loyal vizier, introducing her to a fawning procession of the most powerful people in finance. Ethan's legs felt like lead, but some primal instinct screamed at him to move. He had to get to her. He had to explain. Explain what? The thought died before it could form. What could he possibly say? He turned, and Bella was gone. She had vanished, as if she'd never been there, a phantom of his ambition. He stumbled towards the stairs, his mind a maelstrom of denial and panic. This had to be a nightmare, a stress-induced hallucination from the pressure of Project Nautilus. As he descended to the main deck, the atmosphere changed. The air grew thick with whispers. Faces turned towards him, then quickly away. The same people who had been clapping him on the back an hour ago now looked at him with a mixture of pity and contempt. He was no longer Ethan Sterling, the rising star. He was a spectacle. He was the fool who had betrayed the queen in her own court. He tried to push through the crowd towards Asher, his voice a choked whisper. Leah. Asher. One of Asher's security guards, a man built like a refrigerator, stepped into his path, placing a firm but immovable hand on his chest. I think it's best if you keep your distance, Mr. Sterling. The formal Mr. Sterling, from a man who worked for his wife, was like a slap in the face. He looked past the guard and saw Asher's back. She was speaking with a Japanese investor, her posture perfect, her voice calm and measured. She didn't look back. She didn't acknowledge his existence. It was a more profound and brutal rejection than any screaming match could ever be. Defeated, he retreated. He found a dark corner of the deck and watched the scene unfold. He watched as his colleagues, his rivals, his mentors, all orbited his wife, a woman he thought he knew, a woman he had relegated to the role of a beautiful, docile accessory. He saw her now for what she was, a formidable power, a silent puppeteer who had been pulling the strings all along. The firm wasn't just Sterling and Vanguard. It was her firm. Project Nautilus wasn't just his deal. It was her deal. He had been playing in her sandbox, thinking he was building an empire. The rest of the night was a blur of humiliation. The yacht docked, and he disembarked like a ghost, avoiding eye contact, the silence of his peers a deafening roar. He took a taxi back to the penthouse, the driver's meaningless chatter about the weather, feeling like an assault on his shattered senses. He let himself into the apartment he had always considered his. It was silent and immaculate, but it no longer felt like home. It felt like a museum, a beautiful and expensive place where he didn't belong. Her scent was everywhere, lavender and old books, a mocking reminder of the peace he had just obliterated. Her closet was half empty. A suitcase was gone. A single framed photo on her nightstand had been placed face down. It was a picture from their wedding day. He collapsed onto the edge of their bed. The full weight of his actions crashed down on him. It wasn't just the professional suicide. It wasn't just the spectacular, public humiliation. It was the realization that his entire marriage, his entire understanding of his life, had been a lie. He had not been the provider, the protector, the ambitious man carving a path for his gentle wife. He had been the project, a pet, a man given every opportunity to prove his worth, who had chosen instead to prove his weakness. He slept for a few fitful hours and woke to a cold, grey dawn. He showered and dressed for work on autopilot, his Tom Ford suit now feeling like a costume. He didn't know what else to do. Walking into the Sterling and Vanguard lobby was like walking into his own funeral. The receptionist wouldn't meet his eye. The elevator ride up was silent. The other passengers pressed against the far walls, as if he were contagious. When he reached his floor, his assistant, a young woman who had always been friendly and eager, simply pointed towards the main boardroom. "They're waiting for you." His office, his corner of the world on the 54th floor, was irrelevant now. He walked the long hallway to the boardroom, each step an eternity. The heavy oak doors were slightly ajar. He pushed one open and stepped inside. The room was vast and intimidating, dominated by a 40-foot mahogany table. At the far end, silhouetted against the panoramic view of the city, sat two people. One was a man he didn't recognize at first, dressed in a lawyer's impeccably tailored suit, his face sharp and impassive. The other was Asha. She was dressed in a simple but severe black dress. Her hair was pulled back in a tight chignon. The soft, gentle wife was gone. In her place sat the chairwoman of the board. She gestured to the single isolated chair at the opposite end of the long table. "Ethan," she said, her voice clear and cold, devoid of any emotion. "Thank you for coming. Please sit down. We have a great deal to discuss." Sitting at the far end of that vast mahogany table felt like being a defendant in a courtroom where the verdict was already decided. The 60 feet of polished wood between him and Asha was a chasm, an unbridgeable canyon carved out by his own stupidity. The man beside her, who introduced himself coolly as Julian Vance, her personal counsel, opened a leather-bound portfolio, the rustle of paper, an unnervingly loud sound in the dead silent room. Ethan's mouth was dry. He tried to start, to offer some pathetic, preemptive apology. "Asha, Leah, I can explain." "No, Ethan," she cut him off, her voice as sharp and clean as breaking glass. "You can't. But I can. And I think it's important that for once, you simply listen." She leaned forward slightly, her hands clasped on the table. The soft, pregnant woman he had left behind was gone, replaced by a strategist, a CIO, a woman completely in command. "Let me start with some history," she began, her tone maddeningly calm, like a professor giving a lecture. "My grandfather, Jonathan Davenport, was a brilliant but intensely private man. He had no interest in the spotlight. He believed the name on the door was less important than the wealth it generated and the principles it upheld. Hitched by a board, with the primary beneficiary, first my father and now me, acting as a silent, guiding hand." She paused, letting the weight of the words sink in. Ethan could only stare, his world being more methodically deconstructed and reassembled into a reality he couldn't recognize. "When we met," she continued, "I was finishing my master's in art history, and you were a junior associate here. I made a conscious choice to keep my connection to the firm a secret. I suppose I wanted something real. I was tired of men who were only interested in the Davenport name. You were ambitious, driven, and brilliant. I fell in love with that man." For the first time, A flicker of emotion crossed her face, a wisp of old sadness that was there and gone in a heartbeat. I loved you, Ethan. I wanted you to succeed on your own merits. I wanted a partner, an equal, not a subordinate who felt he owed his career to his wife. So I watched, silently. I read every report you wrote. I knew about every deal you closed. Mason Thorne has been my eyes and ears here since my father passed away. He reported to me, not the other way around. The scale of the deception, her deception, was staggering. His entire career, every success he had celebrated as his own, was now tainted. Had it been real? Or had she been clearing the path for him, all along? Project Nautilus, he croaked, the name of his masterpiece turning to ash in his mouth. A small, mirthless smile touched Asha's lips. Project Nautilus was my idea. The startup was founded by a friend of mine from Stanford. I assigned it to your division specifically. I wanted it to be your triumph, the final step that would secure your partnership on your own terms. It was supposed to be my gift to you, the last one before I told you the truth, after our son was born. A gift. He had taken her gift and used it as a stage for his own betrayal. And Isabella Rossi? He asked, the name feeling vile. Julian Vance, the lawyer, spoke for the first time, his voice a cold baritone. Ms. Rossi was flagged by our internal review board 2 months ago. Ambitious, certainly, but also reckless. She has a history of leveraging personal relationships for professional gain. Mason was concerned. Asha was more forgiving. She saw her as a test for you. Asha's eyes met his again, and now they were not cold. They were filled with a profound, soul-crushing disappointment. I saw the way she looked at you, Ethan. I saw the late nights at the office. I wanted to believe you were better than that. I wanted to believe the man I married, the father of my child, had integrity. The yacht party. That was the final test. I told you I was feeling ill because I wanted to give you a choice. I wanted to see who you would be when you thought I wasn't looking. She took a slow, deliberate breath. And you showed me. The room was silent. There was nothing to say. No defense, no excuse. He had been weighed, measured, and found wanting in the most spectacular fashion imaginable. So, here are the consequences of your choices, Asha said, her voice returning to its business-like chill. She gestured to the lawyer. Julian Vance slid a folder across the vast table. It stopped a few feet from Ethan. Inside, you will find 2 documents, the lawyer stated. The first is your termination agreement from Sterling and Vanguard Capital, effective immediately for gross misconduct and breach of the company's ethics clause. There will be no severance. Ethan stared at the folder, unable to touch it. The second document, Vance continued, is a petition for divorce. Asha is filing on the grounds of infidelity. Our prenuptial agreement, which you signed, is quite clear. In the event of infidelity, you forfeit any and all claims to marital assets, which, as you now understand, are considerable. You will leave the marriage with only what you brought into it. Fired, divorced, stripped of everything, in the space of 12 hours. Asha, please, he finally managed to say, the plea thin and pathetic. Our son, our baby. You will have no parental rights, she said, her voice finally cracking with a sliver of raw, controlled fury. Our lawyers will ensure that. You are not the man I want raising my son. You are not the role model he deserves. You will provide for him financially, of course. A court-ordered portion of whatever meager income you manage to earn will be garnished, but you will not be in his life. You will not poison him with your weakness and your betrayals. She stood up, the movement fluid and final. She was the judge, and the sentence had been passed. This meeting is over. Security will escort you to your former office to collect your personal belongings. You will then be escorted from the building. The locks on the penthouse have already been changed. My staff will pack your remaining things and have them sent to an address of your choosing. Goodbye, Ethan. She turned and walked towards a private door behind the head of the table, not once looking back. Julian Vance gathered his papers, gave Ethan a look of utter disdain, and followed her out. Ethan was left alone in the silent, cavernous boardroom. He looked at the folder on the table. He looked out the window at the city. His city, which now felt like a foreign country. He had flown so high, so close to the sun, but the sun had not been some abstract concept of success. It had been his wife, and he hadn't just been burned. He had been vaporized. 6 months later, the Manhattan skyline looked different to Ethan. He no longer saw it from the 54th floor, but from the smudged window of a cramped, 4th-floor walk-up in Queens. The scent of success had been replaced by the smell of boiled cabbage from his neighbor's apartment and the damp chill of a building that had seen better decades. His Tom Ford suits were gone, sold for rent money. His Patek Philippe was a ghost on his wrist, long since pawned. The fallout from that night on the yacht had been absolute. He was not just fired, he was radioactive. The story, a carefully sanitized version, of course, had spread like wildfire through the tight-knit world of Wall Street. No one would hire him. The name Ethan Sterling was synonymous with career suicide and spectacular stupidity. He had tried to find work at smaller firms, regional banks, but the doors were all closed. His resume was a monument to a life that no longer existed. He was currently working under a different name for a soulless data entry firm in New Jersey, a job that barely covered his bills. He had lost more than money and status. He had lost his identity. The ambition that had fueled him, the fire that had driven him, had been extinguished, leaving behind only the bitter ash of regret. One rainy Tuesday, while scrolling through a financial news site on his cheap laptop, he saw it. A press release from Sterling and Vanguard Capital. His breath caught in his throat. Sterling and Vanguard, under the leadership of Chairwoman Asha Davenport Sterling, announces record third-quarter profits following the successful integration of the Nautilus acquisition. There was a photo of her. She was standing on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange, ringing the opening bell. She looked radiant, powerful, and serene. In her arms, wrapped in a blue blanket, was a baby. Their son. The caption named him Jonathan, after her grandfather. Ethan stared at the image, a wave of grief so profound it buckled him. The tiny face of the son he would never know, the triumphant face of the woman he had lost. He saw now, with agonizing clarity, the life he had thrown away. He had been so obsessed with proving he didn't need her money that he had failed to appreciate the one thing that was priceless: her love, her belief in him. He learned through gossip sites that Isabella Rossi had fared no better. She was fired the Monday after the party, a single-line email her only notification. She had been unofficially blacklisted. No reputable firm in North America or Europe would touch her. Last he heard, she was working for a shady investment house in Dubai, her meteoric rise ending in a desolate, sandy exile. She had been a serpent, but a serpent he had willingly invited into his garden. They had destroyed each other. The days bled into one another, a monotonous cycle of shame and regret. He would sometimes walk by the Sterling and Vanguard building late at night, a pathetic pilgrim drawn to the site of his downfall, and stare up at the lighted windows where he had once felt like a god. He realized now that Asha's greatest strength wasn't her fortune. It was her character, her patience. She had given him a kingdom and waited patiently to see if he was worthy of being its king. She hadn't set a trap for him. She had laid out a path to greatness and trusted him to walk it. His betrayal wasn't just a moment of weakness on a yacht. It was the culmination of 1,000 small compromises, of an ego that had grown so large it had eclipsed his heart. One evening, as he was clearing out an old box of belongings, he found a framed photo that had been sent over from the penthouse. It was from a vacation they had taken to Italy, 2 years into their marriage. They were on a small boat off the coast of Amalfi. He was at the helm, laughing, and Asha was looking at him, her face alight with pure, unadulterated love. There was no artifice in her gaze, no hidden power, just a woman in love with her husband. He traced the outline of her face with his finger. That was the woman he had betrayed, not the chairwoman of the board, but the woman who believed in him when he was just an associate with big dreams. He hadn't just lost a wealthy wife. He hadn't just lost his career. He had lost the best part of himself. And as he sat there in his tiny, lonely apartment, with the sound of the city's indifferent hum outside his window, Ethan Sterling finally understood the true meaning of being bankrupt. A year can be an eternity. For Ethan, it was a sentence served in the quiet, grey monotony of a life he never imagined. The sharp edges of his ambition had been ground down into a dull, persistent ache of regret. He no longer dreamed of corner offices or billion-dollar deals. His aspirations were now confined to making rent and avoiding the sympathetic glances of the few people who knew his real name. He had accepted his exile. It was a form of penance, a hair shirt woven from obscurity and failure. It was a crisp autumn afternoon, and the sky over New York was a brilliant, cloudless blue. Ethan was walking home from the ferry, having chosen to take the longer, more scenic route through the city, rather than descend into the suffocating press of the Queens-bound subway. It was a masochistic pilgrimage he sometimes allowed himself, walking through the very streets where he had once been a prince. He found himself on the edge of Central Park, the leaves turning brilliant shades of crimson and gold. On an impulse he couldn't explain, he entered, walking along the winding paths near the carousel. Families were everywhere, laughing children, couples holding hands, the vibrant tapestry of a life he had once taken for granted. And then he saw her. She was standing by the pond, pointing out the ducks to a small child in a stroller. It was Asha. She was not the regal chairwoman from the boardroom, nor the gentle wife from his memories. This was a new version of her. She was dressed in a simple cream-colored sweater and jeans, her hair tied back in a loose ponytail. She looked relaxed, happy, and utterly at peace. The child in the stroller, his son, Jonathan, let out a squeal of delight, and Asha's laugh, a sound Ethan hadn't heard in what felt like a lifetime, was genuine and unrestrained. Ethan froze behind a large oak tree, his heart seizing in his chest. His son. He was bigger now, a toddler with a shock of dark hair just like his own, and his mother's bright blue eyes. A wave of longing so intense it was physically painful washed over Ethan. This was the life he should have had. The walks in the park, the easy laughter, the simple joy of watching his son discover the world. She wasn't alone. Standing beside her, holding a designer diaper bag with an air of grandfatherly contentment, was Mason Thorne. The firm's formidable CEO was smiling, pointing at the ducks along with Asha, his corporate armor shed in favor of a tweed jacket. He looked at Asha, not with the deference of an employee, but with the deep, paternal affection of a trusted friend and mentor. She had a family, a real one, built on loyalty and genuine care, not the fragile framework of ambition and convenience that he had constructed. He watched for what felt like hours as they moved from the pond to a bench, where Asha took Jonathan out of the stroller and held him on her lap, reading to him from a picture book. Ethan was a ghost at the feast of his own life, invisible, watching through a window at the warmth inside. He saw the easy way Asha kissed the top of her son's head, the way Mason made a funny face that sent Jonathan into a fit of giggles. He understood then the true depth of his punishment. It wasn't the loss of the penthouse or the money. It wasn't even the career he had torched. His real punishment was this. Asha and Jonathan were not just surviving without him. They were thriving. Her happiness was not diminished by his absence. It was enabled by it. He had been the obstacle to this peace, the storm that had to pass before the sun could shine. As they packed up to leave, Jonathan wobbled a few unsteady steps away from the bench. Asha turned to catch him, her gaze sweeping casually across the park. For a single, terrifying second, her eyes met Ethan's. It lasted no longer than a heartbeat, but it held the weight of a lifetime. There was no anger in her eyes, no hatred, no pity, not even a flicker of the love she once had for him. There was only a brief, cool moment of recognition. It was the simple, blank acknowledgement one might give a stranger you realize you've seen somewhere before, but can't quite place. Then she turned back to her son, scooped him into her arms, and walked away with Mason, her back straight and her future bright. She hadn't even broken her stride. He was a ghost, a flicker in her peripheral vision, already forgotten. Ethan stood rooted to the spot long after they had disappeared. The brilliant autumn sun felt cold on his skin. His reckoning was complete. He was not the tragic hero of his story. He wasn't even the villain. He was simply irrelevant. And as he finally turned to begin the long, lonely walk back to Queens, he knew that was a sentence from which there could be no appeal. So often, we are consumed by the climb. We fix our eyes on the summit, the promotion, the recognition, the next big prize, and we forget to look at the person holding the ladder. Ethan Sterling believed his wife was at the bottom, a gentle spectator to his grand ascent. He never realized she was the mountain itself. His story is a brutal reminder that the greatest betrayals are not against our enemies, but against those who offer us their unwavering trust. He traded a lifetime of genuine love and unimaginable partnership for a fleeting moment of ego and a kiss that cost him everything. True power isn't about controlling others. It's about having the integrity not to fail the ones who believe in you most. What did you think of Ethan's downfall? Was his fate deserved? Let us know your thoughts in secrets, lies, and ultimate reckonings. Go with a friend,